and that's the only way.
How much of sort of local wildlife is still part of the diet there?
Huge part for most of the smaller communities, and I believe there's no starvation because the Inuit, our tradition is to share food, to share country food. So I strongly believe there's no starvation in the north because we share our food. So in some communities there's caribous, there's clams, there's whales, there's seals. So Inuit harvesting is quite active up in the north.
You called it country food a second ago. That may be an expression that people in the south don't know. What does that mean?
Country food is anything whale skin, whale meat, seal, fish, Arctic char, anything that's harvested on the land. And we eat them raw, frozen, dry, aged. So we eat a lot what there is edible.
Okay, so you eat a lot of country food. Doesn't that go some way towards not being so dependent on the very expensive food you have shipped up from the south then?
Yeah, in some ways it is, but it's also very expensive to hunt, to buy gasoline, to buy skidoo, to buy parts for the sled, to buy bullets. So those are as well very expensive, and it's an export.
Okay, so this is I don't know how much of an issue this is in Alaska. We don't really hear about it in the center part of our Arctic, which is still referred to as the Northwest Territories, but we do hear a lot about it in the newer region that was split off as a semi-autonomous region. It includes the areas around Hudson Bay and a very large island in the north called Baffin Island. This is the Canadian high north, where they only get a few weeks of summer. These are areas where you have 10 months worth of winter. And that individual there is an ethnic Inuit person, who you may still want to refer to as an Eskimo, although they largely would prefer that you don't do that anymore. But if you don't know the terminology, then you may still only know that word, and so that is an Eskimo, and the Eskimos would prefer that you call them Inuit. Looks like an Asian person, huh? Japanese, kind of. Yeah. The Inuit actually came over last, so the Inuit are fairly recent movement over. They would have. It's actually, I think, only about 4,000 years ago that it's thought, and they actually came over the Arctic. So they're a different ethnic group than the indigenous people of the South. You know, the Native Americans, the Inuit are not Native Americans, or they're not of the ethnic group that you would associate with Native Americans. They're the same people that you see in the far east of Russia, and they went over the North Pole rather than across the Bering Strait. What I'm getting at is so these are areas that have very short summers, and so very short. It's winter all the time, and the only way you can get food in is by plane, and because it's very, very far. Just to get an idea of the distance, it's about 2,000 kilometers from Winnipeg to Baffin Bay, which is about the same distance as from Winnipeg to Cuba, right? I'm going to switch my battery. I mean, it's probably not really that necessary just look at a map, right? It's that really, really, really big island in the northeast of Canada, not Newfoundland, like further north, right? It's closer to Greenland. Greenland's the huge one, and Baffin Island's the one kind of a little bit outside of it, right? Um, and the regions around there, right? Um, and there's this sort of periodic narrative that you hear come up in the Canadian discourse about how expensive it is, and this is a problem. We got to do something about it. There's price gouging. People are stealing money. And it's what is it that we can do to help the Northerners lower their cost of living? This entire discourse, this entire discussion is largely operating in a point of extreme ignorance. And I took that part out that I did for a reason. Country food. The host picked that out as an unusual expression. I suggested that most of us wouldn't be familiar with it. In fact, I have heard that term before. Somewhere else where you will hear the term country food is in Africa. Specifically in the areas of Africa that have been heavily colonized. But with a slightly resistant or uncolonized population. And they will refer to their, traditional types of food as country food. Like monkeys. And something that you'll hear. If I think that I heard the term in reference actually to a documentary I was watching on Ebola. And they were talking about how you shouldn't eat the country food because you might get sick. For the reason that they eat it raw, or they, char it in a barbecue or whatever else, right? But what is this country food? It's, and if you listen to the way she said it, it was obviously very dismissive, right? And so that was an improper thing to eat. And something that she almost seemed ashamed of, right? How do we get to this situation where the indigenous people of Baffin Island, thousands of miles away from Toronto or Winnipeg, in an area that has almost no summer months, are relying on the importation of Western food, like Coca-Cola? Is that an error? Is that an accident? In fact, if you understand the tactics that the Canadian state has used to colonize and destroy the identity of its indigenous populations, you realize that it's not an accident. He used another word there. He used the word dependency. And that may be a trigger word for certain people that may get quite upset. But in the context of the Canadian state's colonial apparatus, the dependency is intentional. So the way that the Canadian state operates, and they did this not just with the Inuit, okay, they did it with all the other indigenous groups around them. All right, and it's a part of a process. Is that the first thing they do is they make you dependent on them. And then once you're dependent on them, then they take it away. The purpose of the dependency is to eliminate your culture. So they talk about things like, the cost of food being extremely expensive. And there being these, middlemen in between, and there should be more regulation in order to, and then you'll get fiscal conservatives, yelling that, we're wasting all this money here. That they're all missing the point. Okay, this is an industry that's designed up to foster dependence. And the reason they want to foster dependence is that they want to abolish the culture. And the reason they want to abolish the culture is that they want to assimilate the people that live there into a broader Canadian identity. Right? That's colonization. And Canada remains a colonial state. Its policies continue to be broadly colonial in nature. So he says, well, why don't you hunt the seal, the whales, and the caribou? She talked about gas and the cost of gas being expensive. Well, I never needed gas before. I never needed sleds before. Or, they would make their own sleds, make their own huskies, right? Gases, you guys lived there for thousands of years without gasoline, didn't you? Does that reflect a certain level of like the adoption of does that reflect their westernization? Yeah, sure. Okay, but what she's not saying is that the reason that they need gas is that nobody remembers how to make a sled, right? Nobody remembers where to find the caribou. No one remembers, how to do the seal hunt. And that's when the culture dies. So that sounds pretty bleak, right? Are they going to be reliant on imports forever? Well, at some point, they're going to have to develop an economy, right? There are caribou in the region. They could be harvested. That doesn't necessarily mean that you have to go hunt them. You could domesticate them. You could have caribou farms, for example. And you could live like a Western farmer. Let's sidestep all the difficult questions, okay? Things are what they are. You want to drag people away from something. You want to force things on people that they don't want. We've been through the portal, right? So caribou farms, you could have seal farms, right? Fish farms. But in order to do that, okay, the government needs to take a step back from their policy of assimilation, or at least their policy of dependency, of fostering dependency. At this particular point in time, and I'll acknowledge I have not heard anything from the new government about this, besides language that seems like it's interested in presenting policies that are to the benefit of the people that live in the region. But you have to be careful because Canadian this is an issue that Canadian governments and governance has not been able to grapple with. Okay, because at some point it has to accept the logic of colonialism or dismantle itself. A post-colonial Canada is very hard to contemplate, as it is with any other colonial society. Now, as it happens to be, colonialism in Canada is it, I think that the right way to say this is that it's not as dominant or prevalent in our everyday lives, right? You can live a life in Canada without really being aware that you're even living in a colony, right? Which is not to lessen the brutality of it for those who have suffered from it, but to point out that it's not at the center of our consciousness anymore. Okay, but it still underlies the entire logic of the state. So when you hear a state, present platitudes or goodwill, you're right to be or to hold a healthy level of skepticism. But at the very least, the statements that I have heard from the new government are seem as though the government would like to be helpful. And the thing that the government can do is to try and reduce the culture of dependency that it created on purpose. I'm going to say it. You don't have to like it. You can lament it. But the reality is that the culture is gone, right? The premise that you're going to bring back the lifestyle of that the Inuit lived, she says, 50 years ago. That's not going to happen, and for good reason. Let's be real, right? Would you like to go? Would you want to go back to that era? That's a hard life, right? It's a hard place to survive. But that doesn't mean that sustainability is impossible, right? You can have caribou farms. You can grow vegetables indoors, using greenhouses and hydroponics. One of the unique parts about living in the far north is that the sun shines for 6 months of the year. So you have a lot of the year where you can get good solar energy. And, I don't know what kind of batteries you want to get or whatever else, right? For the rest of the year. But for a good half of the year, you've got lots of potential to grow, right? And I mean, I'm actually all for sharing food. I think that's a great idea, and you should keep doing that. maybe if you get some caribou farms going, you can start talking about trading things, right? But the narrative as it is, um, what the media will present the argument as, the debate as, it's what can we do to lower the costs of imports? Well, if you're importing something 2,000 miles away from civilization, um, there's not a damn thing you can do to lower the costs, right? You need to look at the situation and try to come up with a better solution. But like I say, it's not an accident, right? This is what exists by design, and to get out of that, you have to change the engineering. And well, if you've ever been ready for it, we're ready for it now, right?